or poor populations in the developing world. So I'm not a hydrologist, I'm not an architect. This is a very different area of preoccupation. And the reason I'm talking about this is because when I was told the theme of the symposium was building with water, as far as I'm concerned, building with water means building with taps, with pipes, with bathroom equipment, with kitchen equipment, with connections to sewers, which is the surrounding system which can remove all that waste or bring the water in. And the fact is that at this moment in the world, I should think at least half the world's population cannot even aspire to having a building with water. And I was kind of intrigued by the fact that Rahul said that when they asked the people what their priority was in the building, they said they wanted the washroom, meaning also the toilet, to be as important a room as any other room in the building. So let me tell you that a bathroom in the house, which is what I've called this talk, is a major aspiration for people in the developing world. Aspiration they will probably, most of them, never meet. Never believe people when they tell you that people in the developing world don't want sanitation. They all want a bathroom in the house. Okay, so you can't see her, what a shame. Here's an Egyptian lady who has a bathroom in the house. And she's decorated, you can see the decoration of the ceramic on the floor. She doesn't have a tap, she has to have a bucket. She has to sponge herself, she has to flush with the bucket. But that is, as you can see, if you can see the expression on her face, it's her pride and joy. So before we turn to other parts of the developing world and all that scene, I thought we might just look at the beginning of the flushing loo, because the flushing loo is, of course, with water, the most congenial and delightful and special way that we have in removing our wastes. And it's the major aspiration that everyone has. And the first water closet that we know of that was ever built and patented was by Sir John Harrington, who built it for his godmother, Queen Elizabeth I, who was coming to visit. And it's a rather amazing contraption. The cistern is at the top, you can see where the fish are swimming, and the seat is D, and there's a hole where you're going to sit. Water is coming down into that hole, and you're going to deposit your business on K, and then you're going to pull a brass handle, and it's going to flush down into the, I think it would probably be the moat below, or the stream below. So this is the world's first water closet as far as we know. Well, fast forward, in Britain, during the next couple of centuries, everybody, the kind of means of going to the toilet was what was called a necessary house, a house of office, various other euphemisms, but it was not a water closet. It was often a rather unpleasant pit toilet in the bottom of the house, and gradually, as housing became more dense, the situation became more disgusting and more vulnerable. So by the early 19th century, you were beginning to have a major sanitary crisis. And in the 1830s, or I think it might have been the 1820s, cholera arrived in Europe, and that became obviously a major concern, because people believed not that water brought germs, but that the air that smelt, the putrefying air, was the source of disease. So if you had a large stink, it was expected that it was the stink that was going to infect you and not any contact with the water. So nobody worried about water closets, which were now coming into fashion as incomes were rising and status was improving. And in new housing in Bath, in Brighton, in the spa towns, in the 1820s, this was the first new housing that had inbuilt water closets. But of course there were no sewers, or no effective sewers, and certainly no treatment of their output. So the new housing with its water closets was just putting all the detritus into the local rivers or into the sea. Now, gradually, the theory of disease began to, there was more scientific evidence, and Dr. John Snow, it's a very famous story, he had the handle of a pump in Broad Street removed because he proved that cholera came through the water, was waterborne and not airborne. And in fact, the supply of water to that particular pump had been infected by what was called the dejecta from a cholera patient. Unfortunately, he was ignored. He was not believed, and we then had the crisis of 1858, the Great Stink, it was known, when the Thames became so disgusting and the smell from the Thames in a hot summer became so awful that Houses of Parliament could barely, the courts of justice had to be closed, the Houses of Parliament could barely sit, and that pushed through, that was the incentive for legislation to sewer London with major sewers, so that all the nasty streams and which was just emptying into the Thames would be captured in the embankment in the great sewers that were built along the embankment. So this brought on the great age of sewerage transformation, in which I think we can say that Britain led the way. So, as I said, that toilets and their effluvia were the problem, and the problem of emptying pits and cesspools required this major sewer construction. But it was still thought that sewers were a source of disease. The question of wastewater treatment was still very embryonic. So there was a kind of argument, a big controversy about whether a sewer, as John Ruskin said, was a nobler thing, as he announced, or whether it was going to contaminate all our rivers and spread disease. And during the process of the late 19th century, you could say this is the age of sanitation. Public health acts came in, the science of medicine improved, we had local government reform, much more democratic participation, a desire for clean living, and I would say that the sort of whole idea of cleaning the public space came out of this movement. At the time, the idea of dry sanitation, the earth closet, was still, it had not vanished, it was still very much in the picture. And this is one of the designs. This was a design of 1873 by the Reverend Henry Moore. I don't know why reverends were so much involved, but they were involved in scientific movements generally. But anyway, so he designed several models. This was the simple model. The bucket is missing, but the bucket would be underneath. The earth would be in the chute. You would do your thing in the seat, and then you would pull the chute, and earth would come down into the pail. And at this time in Britain, there was still a large number of systems in towns. At least 100 towns had schemes for the collection of this kind of earth waste. So you'd put your pail out for collection, like your dustbin today, and it would be replaced. And that was the system of sanitation that was still used right up until the end of the 19th century. But of course, we all know that the water flushing loo is so much more desirable and much more fashionable, much more comfortable. And so the demand for water flushing toilets was effectively unstoppable. And in-house toilets and bathrooms really began to, when water at pressure was supplied to almost every household, planning regulations, housing regulations came in that insisted on this. At that point, everybody could have a flushing loo and could have a shower. I mean, everybody of means, that is. So the legacy of the 19th century sanitary revolution is that you have a water-centric public health model. And housing and planning regulations insisted that large supplies of clean water would be laid on, and there would be sewerage connection to lead the waste away. But the problem is that this model, however beautiful it is for the industrialized world, is inappropriate for large parts of the developing world. And this remains so even today. In those days, in the colonial times of the early 20th century, only a tiny, tiny elite, high-rise elite, leafy suburb elite would ever be sewered. It would never be possible to afford economically, industrially, technologically, to sewer large parts of the cities of the developing world. The cost of water and sewage connections is in the hundreds and thousands per head. Depends whether you're in a water-short environment. All sorts of factors can, have to be converted into that. But the cost of the water model for a house is very, very high, and the cost of a tap is not so expensive, but some kind of toilet facility, it cannot be, you have to build it, even if it's standalone in your back garden, it's going to be a lot cheaper. It's going to cost somewhere between $10 and $150 per head. So the triumph of building with water, which I've adopted this phrase to talk about sanitation, can be seen as having created a huge global social divide. Perhaps it's even more important than the rich-poor divide. It's the divide between those who can have a bathroom and toilet in the house and those who cannot. So today's sanitation crisis, we'll come on to that now. I've looked up the latest statistics, and the way they're computed is very difficult to actually work out who has a flushing kind of system and who doesn't. But 2.3 billion people, of global population, that's 32% of the population, global population, without any form of sanitation at all. And of those, nearly 900 million people are just going in the bush. This is technically called open defecation. Okay, so those with a household flush are 1.9 billion. This is what with wastewater treatment, which of course otherwise you're just going to pollute the environment, which does happen in many parts of the developing world and causes huge problems in, for example, India's rivers. But at least 1.9 billion people, that's under a third of the world's population. Now, I think you could say that some others also have flushes because they have septic tanks, an unknown number. They also have dry sanitation in large parts of China, where you flush with ash, and then there are other poor flush methods, which I'll show you in a second. So the urban picture is the one that is really drastic. Half the world's urban population live in slums, and in Africa it's over 70%. And a lot, as we've heard from Dhaka, a lot of these buildings or settlements or houses, if you can even call them that, are illegal, they're invisible, nobody counts them, nobody records them, they aren't subject to building regulations. So you have a crisis of squalor and social disadvantage, which the authorities are kind of impotent to address. Only elite suburbs are sewered, and funnily enough, there's very little aid to the urban poor, and almost none to housing. I don't know whether Will would add something to that, or he would feel differently, but that's my experience. So we have a number of great stinks of today. This is Kolkata, not far from Bangladesh. It's in urban Bengal, West Bengal. Then I've taken a picture from a slum quarter in Monrovia in Liberia. You can at least see the piles of dirt and filth and rubbish right in the middle of the slum. Included in those piles will be bread wrappers and other plastic bags full of excreta because there's nowhere else to put them. Most of the buildings surrounding this place will not have any kind of toilet facility. So then, and I attended a meeting with my international colleagues a mile away from this place, and some of them, including ministers of the government, do not admit that they have a problem in their slums. And there's no aid for slum improvement in Liberia. Okay, so there are some solutions. There are places where there are solutions being put into practice. This is in Kibera in Nairobi, and you can see, if you can see it, that there is paving. It's been paved and there is a drain. It's not terrific, but that is at least a step forward. You don't just have a rotten, filthy pathway between the housing, and you do have some attempt to control rubbish. In this part of town, in this particular slum, they use communal toilet blocks, which you pay to go to, and there's an attendant, and they're community run, and that's a great way for the community to solve their sanitation problems. In a slightly better off community, this is in Dakar, out of Dakar in Senegal. This is a household where at the back there's a toilet and bath and shower facility, but they do lack drains. They have to pay to carry their wastewater out of the community. So there are all sorts of other problems which one can't even begin to anticipate when you don't have building with water. So the mystery to me is why the problem of sanitation is usually presented as a rural problem, when it is overwhelmingly an urban problem. And here you have, in a suburb of Kinshasa in DRC, a woman doing her washing, trying to keep clean, trying to keep her family healthy in a simply filthy environment. So that's the urban picture. And now a little bit about the rural picture. Every traditional society has always had a very strict taboos about how you dispose of excreta. So in some parts of the world, I actually do wonder whether open defecation isn't such a bad thing. You know, where it's densely populated, as in Bangladesh and in the whole of the Ganges Delta or in many other delta areas, Mekong Delta too, you do have to consider sanitation as a major risk. But in a desert, is it going to be a major risk? Is it you have to think about this, because for villagers to use a toilet, it's got to be a nicer toilet than if they were going to go to the bush. Otherwise, they won't use it. And they can't afford to build a solid and well-built toilet. That's a big issue in poor rural areas. They don't have the cash disposal, and so you have to think of these issues through very carefully. There is space often in rural homes, in compounds, to build a little toilet house. So, you can't see that, but that's a hanging toilet in Bangladesh. Okay, we'll move on. This is a poor flush toilet, as you can see the diagram at least. And this is a little place in Bengal where there's a village production center, women are employed, there's a pan, it's polished, so you can flush by hand and you can have yourself a simple, cheap toilet. That's a huge step forward in that part of the world. This is a dry toilet, and it has a vent pipe, which means it doesn't smell. So this is very much the type of toilet used in Africa, but it is quite expensive. Not every rural household has the kind of money to build a great toilet house like that, but it is very, very popular in southern Africa. And here you have, if you can see it, it's a simple slab. You buy a simple slab in the marketplace for $10 or so, and you build yourself a toilet house. And there again, that'll probably be used in peri-urban and semi-rural kinds of areas. Finally, I put in an ecological sanitation toilet because that is there's a huge school that believes that ecological sanitation, which is back to dry sanitation, is the way forward. And the problem with that is that you have to separate the urine from the feces so that you can use them effectively for fertilizer, and that creates taboo problems in many cultures. Okay, so I wanted to point out that the focus of all these programs, the programs that I've been talking about in the developing world to try to fill this gap and provide people with a buffer in the house, the focus is always health. The surveys show that when people express demand, it is not to do with health. People do not seek a toilet because they think it's going to solve health problems. They seek it for all the reasons that we would seek it, for all the reasons that we would want a bathroom in our house, for convenience, safety, dignity, it's a word which we're always using a lot, and social status, being modern. If you invite people around, what kind of house do you have where you can't offer them a facility of a bathroom? The health gains for people are way down the list. So, my conclusion of this, when we go back to the sanitary revolution in the 19th century in Britain, the conclusion is that a toilet is a household improvement. And I wish, and Rahul has really encouraged me here in this sense, because I wish we could get more people in the developing world to latch onto the idea that they can promote sanitation as a household improvement, engage architects or engage builders or engage groups who could get involved with people's building needs instead of trying to push their health needs. So that was my question, where are the builders, who has launched an organization called the World Toilet Association. And this is his house that he's built for himself. And here's another view of it. While I think we do need promotion, I'm not quite sure that pushing for a sanitary revolution in that kind of way is going to achieve a great deal. But at least, he's trying. Okay, so just to wrap up now, taps, pipes, drains, the water solution has been a huge success. But as a solution for much of the world, building with water simply cannot work. So I think the dismissal of dry sanitation, which is impossible in most housing and planning regulations at the moment, it should be rescinded. A toilet in a house is not a health aid, but a household and lifestyle improvement. If we could come up with the right kind of responses that match their needs and involve their own expression of need, we would be able to get a lot further in providing people with what they want. And for that, builders and developers, and not just public health engineers, need to get involved. Just to wrap up, if I've got 2 minutes, I'm going to show you a few positive slides. It won't take a second. Here we have school sanitation in India. There is a lot going on in school sanitation, and that instills the idea and the desire for a facility in your own home when you marry. There's another one. We can't see it well. This is the production center I mentioned earlier. Again, they're marketing very effectively this kind of toilet facility for low-lying, wet, densely settled rural environment. And here we have a Bangladeshi village who has declared themselves open defecation free. And they're having a celebration, they're all carrying flowers, they put up posters, and that's because they've all installed toilets in their houses. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maggie.
Do you know about the organisation that gives a crap?
Oh, no, I do.
They're great. It's toilet paper, no plastic involved, all recyclable or bamboo, and they give 50% of their profits to building toilets in the developing world. It's pretty tough.
Yeah, but World Toilet Day.
There is a World Toilet Day, yes.
Maybe we could do something in Lewis. Anyway.
It's funny, it's a better subject than you expect. But not so resistant. Once you get going, people actually fuck up, Can I ask you about public toilets? Yes. Well, that's very important actually, because there are places where the public toilet block, especially in the urban context, is really the answer. But usually, as you'd expect, a public toilet block will get very disgusting if it's not properly managed and properly looked after. But there's this marvellous guy in India, whose name I've forgotten, who's a millionaire, who may become a millionaire building toilet blocks all over urban India, and they have staff, they have cleaners, so there's a whole, you can develop an industry around that. But I think that, and you pay a bit, you pay so much for a crack, you pay so much for a shower, you pay so much for the laundry facility, to wash your clothes. So I think in certain environments, and I mentioned the one in Nairobi, you really have such dense housing that's going to have to be the answer. And if you do that, the local authority will give you the land for it, or they will come to a deal for the land for it, whereas trying to engage them in providing tenure for all slum dwellers is impossible. So, improvement of housing, even if you have the space, is much more difficult on a private, in a private home in those kinds of environments. Does that answer?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just I read something about women who were getting urinary tract infections because there weren't places where they could go and
Right.
to hold in their pee.
Well, that's probably true in India because, women are taught from a very early age to not go to the loo, basically, except in the dark when they go outside. And there are parts of the world, like for example in South Africa, if a woman is seen going into a public loo, it's very shaming. So there are lots of taboos surrounding the use public toilets, everything, it's really horses for courses. You have to try and accommodate to the environment. But once the need is there, the need is really felt, then people will get together. If you can encourage that, they will get together and think what they can do. But investment must come. I'm absolutely find it absolutely shocking how little investment there is in slum housing, how little aid there is. There's been a kind of attitude for many years that, oh, some populations are so inventive, they're so clever, they can manage to solve their problems, we don't need to worry about them. I mean, it's just nonsense, you know. So I think that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is much more the question of tenure. All these illegal slum settlements, what most governments want to do is just sweep them away. And so defending the territory by the inhabitants creates a lot of difficulties around any kind of improvement or public facility building and so on. So there are very real problems, I understand that, but you know, if you know, think of half the world population, half the population in the developing world, it's an underestimate, in my opinion, to live in slums. Very little is done to improve their